series. I'm excited. This is Foster Care Month. We're honoring parents, and I have an amazing friend with me, Lisa Qualls, who has been a foster parent, is an adoptive parent. She has just been an amazing contribution to the whole community. And one of the most exciting contributions, and we're going to talk about that first, and then we're going to have some questions we're going to ask her, is that she had the amazing privilege to co-author a book with Dr. Karyn Purvis called The Connected Parent. So Lisa, would you tell us about that experience before we jump into questions?
Absolutely. Well, it feels to me, after so many years, like a little bit of a miracle that is coming to fruition, that we're actually going to be holding this book in our hands before too long. I was doing some speaking with Dr. Purvis and with Empowered to Connect conferences way back. And during that time, I got to know her and, of course, admired her greatly and learned so much from her. And I had an idea for a book that I thought would be this beautiful blend of, you know, the researcher, the scientist, the super smart brain science person, and me as a really experienced mom trying to learn this whole new way of parenting, right? I mean, it was so different from the traditional parenting that I had done with my older kids. And so I told her my idea, and she decided, yes, that was something she wanted to do. We started writing this book in 2012, if you can imagine. It was a very long road with lots of hard things happening on both her side and my side. And, you know, we got the manuscript nearly done before she passed away, and we were able to, with some help from her assistant, just pull the last bits together, and we're just thrilled that it's coming out.
Well, I am so excited that it is coming out in July. It's called The Connected Parent, and we'll be letting our friends in our trauma-free world know more about that. I'm excited about that. Well, you know, you have had a long journey. I wish we could have this conversation for an hour for people to really get to know you. But I would like to ask you the question, how important was it that you learned the skills of becoming a trauma-informed parent?
Oh, it was absolutely essential. I can't even imagine where our family would be today if we hadn't learned all that we learned about trauma and how it affected our children and how it impacts the way we need to parent them, because their brains, you know, everything that our children go through when they experience all this early trauma in their lives affects their brains and the way their brains are wired and the way they develop. And when we try to parent them the way we could with children who have not experienced any of this trauma, it really does not work, because our kids come to us, they're kind of wired for self-protection, and they have a lot of fear. It may not look like fear, but they have a lot of fear in their bodies, and we have to we have to bring that fear down and give them such a strong feeling of safety before we can begin truly connecting. And it's a different way. It's just a different way of parenting. And I'm, you know, once I learned trauma-informed, connected parenting, I found myself wishing I had parented all of my children with trust and connection as the foundation instead of authority. You know, if I had been able to nurture their hearts in the same way, I think it would have been a gift.
Yeah, I've heard so many parents say it's been a game changer for them and their families.
Yes.
Well, what resources have been helpful to you as you have been on this new journey, actually for what, the last 8 or 10 years?
Well, we brought our kids home in 2007. And I think that, and you know, we did a lot of training, we learned a lot. And, but after our kids came home, and in particular with our one daughter who had really quite extreme behaviors due to her trauma, then we had to go deeper. And that's when I actually read Wounded Children Healing Homes. That was super influential for me. I found Dr. Purvis's The Connected Child, very influential. And also Deborah Gray's books. I mean, there were amazing resources even back then. And those things gave me skills that I didn't have, and gave me a whole new sort of paradigm for looking at my children's behaviors, that their behaviors were communication
Mhm.
They were telling me something,
Mhm.
but they were just the surface, you know, it was just the outward sign of what was happening deep in my child's heart.
Sure.
So those were whole new skills for us.
What about since that period of time? What new resources have come across your path?
Well, I have gotten to do a number of wonderful trainings. One is I
Mhm.
did TBRI training at TCU,
Okay,
and
let's
I've
explain what that is.
okay,
Trust-based relational intervention.
intervention, and it's really a training more for professionals, and I'm very thankful I got to do that. And it's a whole week long. It's really
Mhm.
remarkable. And then more recently, I got to do TCC training with you, which was just a huge blessing because I can never stop learning. You know, there's always so much more to learn. And also learning how to teach this to people is so important to me as well.
Well, I'm so excited. I've known you through conferences, but to have you, actually we had you for a week and a half in that training we did in Seattle, and that was great.
Yes,
So
it was.
since this is Foster Care Month, I wanted to give a gift in a sense to foster parents, particularly in some cases. I think what we're going to talk about next could apply to dads and moms. But in our trauma competent caregiving series, we have a module specifically dedicated to looking at the challenges of caring for traumatized kids. And we talk about characteristics of trauma informed parents in that module. But I want to add to that conversation. And
Okay.
Lisa, you told me a while back about a concept I had never heard before called blocked care.
Hmm.
But before there's blocked care, you explained to us that there's blocked trust. And what the gift I want to give to parents now in the few minutes that we have left is for them to understand blocked trust and blocked care. Because if we don't, as foster and adoptive parents, we have a lot of guilt that we're failing the mission. So could you explain blocked trust and then blocked care in the time that we have?
Yes. So blocked trust, I think, will probably feel fairly familiar to people. It might be a new word, but what
I
we're
think it will
talking
be.
about, or new phrase, but what we're talking about is children who've experienced early adversity in their lives. So, you know, we usually talk about things like prenatal stress, difficult labor or delivery, early hospitalization, abuse, neglect, trauma, change in primary caregiver. So, every child in
Mhm.
foster care, or even children who come to us just straight from adoption, will have experienced some of these traumatic things. So, we know that when a child is exposed to any of these factors, their brain becomes wired for self-preservation and always watching for
Mhm.
potential threat. And you know, these coping and self-preservation strategies are really, really hard on
Mhm.
families. And it's really difficult when a child has, you know, they have all these skills that were very useful for them before they were in a safe environment and in a family, but they don't translate well to family life, and
Mhm.
they make it very, very hard to nurture and connect with the child. So, you know, so what we call that is block trust.
Sure.
The child is very defended against trusting us, which makes perfect sense given
Oh,
what
it
they've been
does.
through,
Yeah,
right?
and I love we're giving it a term that people can understand, block trust.
Yes. So then we come along as a foster or adoptive parent. We're ready to nurture the child. We want to love them.
Mhm.
Our brains are wired for connection. But when we continually come up against what feels like rejection from the child, when
Mhm.
we continue to reach and make efforts for connection and they are blocked,
Mhm.
our brains start to get confused. And it's really interesting. There's a lot of brain science behind it, but there's a part of our brain that is always anticipating what the response will be.
Mhm.
And our brains are wired for a certain kind of
Mhm.
response. But when that response doesn't come, our brains actually begin to protect ourselves. And this is called blocked care. It's not something that happens consciously. We're not choosing it. It's not a character flaw. It's just that our brain is actually beginning to protect itself from this constant lack of connection and rejection. And I first learned about this from Dan Hughes, who's written some amazing books. I
Hmm.
mean, he's very gifted. And I heard him say this. He said, where there is no reciprocity of relationship, it begins shutting down 4 of the 5 systems of the brain that are crucial in caregiving. And when that
Mm.
happens, a parent can still do their job, but their heart sort of leaves.
Oh, how
That's what,
powerful is that?
yes. And that's what blocked care feels
Mhm.
like. Like we're going through all the motions. We are doing the right things, but our hearts, there's a almost like a hopelessness in it
Mhm.
and a defensiveness that happens that makes it hard to keep trying to connect.
Yes. I first heard you at a conference mention this. Can you give us some of the symptoms of what that would look like? Is that the right word, symptoms or
we
characteristics?
we call it signs. I don't really
Signs.
know.
That's a
We're
better
still,
word.
I'm still figuring this out and developing it a bit on my own, and then with my co-founder of the Adoption Connection, Melissa, we're working on this
Hmm.
together, but we call it the signs of blocked care. And there are 8 that have been
Okay.
identified. So the first one would be that you feel defensive and you guard yourself from rejection from
Okay.
your child.
Hmm.
I want to back up and say one thing first.
Sure.
I do want to be really clear that we are not saying that the child is the problem.
Right.
The problem is the trauma. The problem is the harm
Mhm.
to their brain. The
Sure.
child is not the problem. So I want
Never.
to be
Yeah.
really clear
I.
about that.
I'm so glad you did. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Okay,
good.
so the 8 signs. You feel defensive and you guard yourself from rejection. The second, you feel burned out, chronically overwhelmed,
Mm.
and fatigued. The third,
Mm.
you don't feel real pleasure in parenting, which
Ah,
that's hard when this is
sure.
what you most wanted, right?
Exactly.
The fourth is you're caught up in coping with your child's behavior and you don't have the capacity to consider the meaning behind it. You're just going from one hard moment to the next. Fifth, you may feel irritable with your family and your friends.
Mm.
Six, you may isolate yourselves, which I really experienced that. I just
Mhm.
withdrew. Um, Seven, you may become cynical about even toward new ideas that might help,
Sure.
like going to another therapist or another conference or reading a different book. You might just become cynical about it. And then eighth is that you may feel like you've lost your compassion. And this leads a lot of parents to feel shame. Shame is, when you experience this blocked care
Mhm.
and you thought you were a good mom. I mean,
Sure.
I went into this thinking, I've been a mom for 20 years. I know so much and I love kids. This is going to be hard and good. I thought hard
Sure.
and good. I wasn't
Pardon.
totally naive. But what I found the hardest was the changes in me. Like, I
Mhm.
didn't feel like a good mom anymore. I didn't like the mom I was becoming, and I did not know. I thought it was somehow something that I was doing wrong. I didn't
Mhm.
understand that it was my brain. There was brain science, to explain it, and that
Yeah.
I wasn't a terrible person or a terrible mom at all.
No. I love the fact that you're talking about the brain science. We talked a lot about the brain stuff going on in our kids, but
Hmm.
we haven't talked about the brain stuff that goes on with us. And we
Okay.
don't get what we need from our kids. It's highly costly. So, in the few minutes that we have remaining, what are some things that parents can do? We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Some things that our parents can do.
Well, I've heard Dan Hughes say that the most important thing parents need when they are in blocked care is they need nurture. They need to be
Mm,
nurtured. Just like our children need nurture from us, they need nurture from someone else.
sure.
And that could come from a really good trauma informed therapist. It could come from another parent who's
Sure.
already walked down this road
Who
who
understands
and come
that?
through it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Because the problem is, and we'll see this a lot in like Facebook groups, people surround themselves with people who feel the same. So people will often surround themselves with other parents who are experiencing the same thing and feeling the same thing. And the problem with that is what you really need is someone who can give you hope, someone who's
Sure.
already come out the other side and can actually nurture you and mentor you and give you hope that we can heal. I mean, that's
Mm,
probably one of the most important things that people need to know is that there's hope and we can
mhm.
reawaken compassion and help help our brains heal in order to bring back that softness and tenderness that we need toward our children.
Sure. The negativity, being surrounding ourselves with people who haven't come out the other side, that negativity does a lot to our ability to see hope, if that's the
Absolutely.
case.
In fact, one of the main characteristics that saw both in myself and I see in other parents who are experiencing this is negativity bias. And we
Mm,
know that once we get into this negative space,
sure.
we know that the brain wants to hold on to the negative more than the positive, which is why we can always remember criticism and not so often remember compliments.
Sure.
We're wired for that because it is an early protective thing. But with our kids, when you're experiencing that daily
Mm,
extreme stress and you've
mm,
developed negativity bias toward your child, it can
mm,
get so hard because everything they do kind of assaults you as something that's being negative when it really might not. And I know we don't really have time for a story, but I had an experience like that where I had a daughter. I'll tell it super fast. She
sure.
loved to cook. She was super, super messy. It was kind of stressful. She didn't want to share food with her siblings. And so we had tried to rein it in a little bit. And one day I came home and the kitchen was a mess. And I was not happy. I was irritated that she'd
Mm,
made this huge mess. Fortunately, I paused long enough between
mhm.
my thoughts and my reactions, and my two daughters came running out of the dining room saying, "Surprise, surprise, we cooked dinner." And they
Oh,
set the whole table. But my brain did not go to that initially. It was
sure.
stuck in that negative bias. So, but we can overcome that. We can reawaken compassion. We can heal our brains, and it's
Mm,
something that's so so important because this is a long, long road, and
it
you
is.
you do not want to stay in this place of blocked care for years. It's
Yes.
miserable, you know.
Yes. I love what you said, the pause. Sometimes
Mm,
the pause is so important. Well,
yes.
Lisa, I wish we had so much more time, and maybe we can revisit this, but could you tell our listeners a little bit about your adoption connection?
Yes. So there are a couple things I would recommend if people want to know more or need some extra support. The first thing is that I have my work as a writer and speaker, but I also co-founded the Adoption Connection with my friend Melissa Corkum. And together we've created a free resource called the Compassion Challenge. And
Mm,
I'll have a link specific to Trauma Free World for anybody who wants to come and take a look. It's a free video training that we do. And then we also have developed a more extensive course that we call From Apathy to Empathy. That's a 30-day process where we nurture parents and we give them daily tips on how to break out of this blocked care. So that's one thing. The other thing is if there are any moms, specifically moms, who are in a hard place like this and they need some really uh, more personal support and nurturing, I also have a small membership group on Facebook where I'm in there every day interacting with the moms, and it's very beautiful and supportive. It's a subscription. Um, there's also, I should hop back, the Adoption Connection also has a free Facebook group. So if people want something bigger and more discussion oriented, that's there too.
oh,
So
great. You would
those are
just
two resources.
awesome. And we will have those at the end of this, so you'll send me the links. So
Yes.
I just thank you. You speak so beautifully into the lives of adoptive families, and I deeply appreciate your time that you've done today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always, always good to see you, Jayne.
Yeah, thank you.